Welcome, dear viewers, for Khartoum International TV. In this open dialogue, we're going to speak today in depth regarding the peace issues and the peace environment after the signing the peace agreement in Juba. We are going to speak in depth also regarding the social justice and reconciliations in Sudan after signing the peace, and we have seen that the environment now is completely changed now to the whole, going to the building the peace, stability and whatever. With me here is Professor Samani. He is lecturist in Al-Ahfad University and is an expert and is very known to all the TVs, international and locally. And he also is a specialist in the peace issues and the peace. Welcome, Professor Mani.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I am happy to join this very special movement at Khartoum International Channels. I hope that we'll be able to contribute to the discussion and analysis provided throughout this special episode. Thanks.
And with me also Dr. Zuhair Bashar is a new face in the Khartoumtv in open dialogue. He's a political science specialist and conflict resolution and reconciliation, and also he's a researcher in United of Manchester University and Grand Fort, and also is, by the way, also he was in UN United Nations missions in Sudan. Welcome, Dr. Zuhair.
Thank you, Dr. Yasir. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm really happy to be here with you and with Dr. Samani, and I hope the audience will be fine to listen to us in this discussion.
After the signing the peace agreement in Juba, I think so the whole soul of the political environment and political arena is going for just for building the stability, political stability and economic and social stability, and also talking about the stuff of nation buildings. That is part of the next coming nearest future. Can you, Professor Samani, we start with you?
Thank you for this very central questions. And I think that after December Revolution, as one of the main slogan raised during December Revolution, the peace. This is the second slogans of the December Revolutions. And by signing peace in Juba, we go a step forward to realize peace in country, and also the second step to build and sustain peace in Sudan. Now we started the long road of peace building in Sudan by signing this agreement in Juba. People are now welcoming the peace in Khartoum especially, and during the last few weeks there are so many activities by the missions of the peace in Sudan. And now we started a very long marathon and very long journey to build the peace at different levels and dimensions, to be internally for Sudanese people when accept each other in this country, and out in the environment or surrounding environment of the Sudanese people by realizing what we describe as transitional justice in the country. So this is a very long road and needs collaborative effort from all stakeholders in peace process in order to achieve this final destination. And I wish that Sudan will pass these very critical times and will establish sustainable peace in Sudan in this very special moment. Needless to go back to the history of violence in Sudan, and which is dated back to the Mahdist state for very long history. Sudan recorded very long history of violence, and I think this peace will be the turning point in the history of violence in country, and to me, to build what we describe as a peacocratic state. In this special state that Sudan, we are going to make the peace as a final destination for all peoples in the country, and also even in the neighboring countries and regions and the world as well. So I think this will be now a new era of peace, air of peace building, peace, sustaining peace in the country, and all Sudanese people will work together in order to achieve this final destination.
Yes, in the same way also, talking about Mr. Professor Sammani, talking about the strategy of nation buildings and the history of the conflict in Sudan since Mahdi and since after the independence of Sudan, Sudan still going on the same issue. It didn't jump out of that because of the conflict, which is it's been with Sudan from a long time, the war and whatever, and the conflict. Since that time, almost more than 60 years, we are in the same position. Can you just explain to us how the history of that site from the independence up to now, why still up to now Sudan is on that conflict, and how can we jump from that after signing the agreement in Juba?
Thank you, Dr. Yasir. As mentioned by my colleague Sammani, actually I think the issue of conflict and the legacy of conflict has been inherited in Sudan, not only since independence, it was since the formation of the modern Sudan. The formation of modern Sudan itself was based on violence. If you go back to the era of Egyptian, Turkish colonial, in that era, Sudan hasn't been known as a one country. It was different regions,
yes,
different countries with different kind of government institutions. If you look to Darfur, it was 4 sultanates. If you look to farther north, you'll find that states of Alawa, Makarra, and this and that. And if you look to the southern Sudan, it was completely separated from the north. It's only during the colonial period of the British, Turkish, when Sudan come into being as one country. All these regions, west, north, south, east, were brought together by force. That was the legacy of the formation of the national Sudanese state. And then, only a few years came Mahdiya, and the Mahdiya was able to push the colonial by force,
yes,
and they replaced him. Later on, only a few years also, came the other colonial period, the Condominium period, Egyptian, and they pushed the Mahdiya, they conquered Sudan again, and that also through violence. So it is a history of violence. And when it comes to the time of independence, only 1 year before independence, 1955, the civil war broke out in southern Sudan. It is before independence. That is a kind of violence. It's political violence and civil war. So it is a history and a legacy. We have inherited, the modern Sudan has inherited a history of conflict and violence. Yeah. That is why this history has shaped the modern Sudan. And even the central government have tried to go step by step on the same foots, yeah, of the colonial state, yeah, and they try to impose what's so-called strategy of national ideology, yeah, instead of taking people gradually and bringing consensus among people. Yeah. They took the power and they imposed a national of ideology. What was the ideology that imposed? It was Islamic Arab, yeah, ideology.
Yes, true.
And without consultation with the wider
of the
Sudanese people. So that was the legacy. So it continues to impose that modern state which was established by colonial, and it goes in the same way. That is of this violence and conflict.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zuhair. He's mentioned a very important point, in fact, by the way, after the independence of Sudan, Dr. Sammani. Sudan is still also going from conflict to war conflict in all the... After the secession of Southern Sudan, we're expecting that Sudan to be at least to stay in peace after Nivasha, in fact, and after the secession of Southern Sudan. But still, Darfur started the war and the west and two areas, South Kordofan and Nuba Mountain. That one is. Do you think that that the role of international community, is it there in the hands, or maybe this is something internally because of the marginalization, and these people maybe having so much problems regarding the community, regarding the people, regarding the infrastructures and whatever, and the development of those areas, which is far from the center?
Yeah, I think the assumptions of marginalization is the core factor behind continuous violence in the country. And you know, the very rich debate between centers and the peripheries and the rural areas, and especially the rebels who involve actively in explaining the relationship between center and peripheries in the country, and describe the lack of basic service to this area, and they describe it in one concept: the marginalized people. So the marginalized people, for very long history, they suffer from the inherited culture of violence. And this is what I agree with Dr. Zuhair, that we have very long history of violence, and I describe it as violence-cratic state. State 100% rely on violence for a very long time. Sudan, although the Sudanese individuals seems are very peaceful, but in the practice of politics, and especially at the government level, are very violent. So there is very long history of violence, and this is started through the modern Sudan since 1981, when Muhammad Ali Pasha invaded Sudan, and up to now Sudan passed through very long history. In the national state after independence in 1956 and upward, the military revolution is another way of the violence in the country. So I think the agreement of Juba that can explain a full stop in this very long history of violence, and to start a new state, we describe it as peacocratic state, a state that 100% rely on dialogue, rely on peace negotiation, rely on the peace, not on violence. So this is, I think, a turning point in the history of the Sudanese people. Now we have to build the Sudan on a new basis of peace, basis of dialogue, basis of discussion, basis of accepting others, basis of respecting the human rights and not to violate the human rights. Needless to repeat that the Sudanese national government, since independence and up to now, they demonstrated to violate the human rights in different dimensions, economic, social, cultural rights, all violated and demonstrated through record. There is very long history of violation. So now, I think, through this agreement of peace, we move into new era of the peaceful state that respect everyone, that share honor of building this country, all the nations, and also the culture. We stop the culture of violence and we start a new page. That is, we look hopefully to the future and to build the country on equal basis, on the right of citizenship, the state of the state of rule of law, and these values we are looking forward to have in the future. I think now Sudan is tracking by this peace agreement into the right direction, and to stop the violence that inherited for very long history, and also to stop the violence culture. That is what we call or inherited for a very long time, for many reasons. For example, cultural imperialism, that Arabian culture can dominate the countries, and other subcultures also they find. So I think this is the right way to understand the root causes of problem. When we tackle the history of violence, and when we focus on the culture, also we examine the insights of culture, we can easily discover the root causes of this very long history of violence. I think the right way to solve the problem, we have to address the violence, the history of violence in Sudan, and to move to stop this violence forever, and to build Sudan on a new basis.
It's a very good point, I think so, by the way, and this is part of the basic of how can we discuss and how can we talk about that type of culture. You're talking about cultural violence. This is very important. Dr. Sammani mentioned very important point, that cultural violence and community violence, and that part of culture, in fact, by the way, we need to discuss about it with the intelligences and whatever, and those all experts regarding this side, because this is going to in fact to treat all the problems. Dr. Zuhair, I think so. This is the important point. Do you think that after signing the agreement with in Juba, with those movements and with our political movement, our political parties here, do you think that this is the right way we can just cross that problem and that disaster which has been with us for a very long time, that culture, that abusing of the cultures, that abusing of other cultures, abusing of the other community culture, that is the main problem which is the marginalizations in Sudan. That is the problem. The center is controlling everything, by the way, from very long time, and just putting that, this is why the whole the areas is having that problem. Do you think that after this signing this agreement, Dr. Zuhair, you think that is we are in right way now?
Thank you, Dr. Yasser. That's a very good question. Yes, I do agree. Regardless of agreeing with Juba peace agreement or disagree with it, the central point is people opt to a peaceful solution. That is the central point. If it can be considered as a departure from the culture of violence and culture of conflict and this kind of trend for a long time, that in itself is a very good start. It's a very good start point. Peace is a process. It's not a one-off step.
Not signature only.
Exactly.
It's not a signature.
Yeah. Signature can cease fire, can stop violence, but it cannot root the causes, the structural causes of the conflict. Structural causes of the conflict lie where? It lie in the social discrepancies. It lies uneven development. Yeah. It lies in injustice. It lies in all this together. So, but in order to address all these issues of justice, issues of uneven development, issues of social justice, issues of economic underdevelopment, you need to stop the war first, and then to go one step forward by setting out a range of process and procedures which can be described as peace agreement, and then you go forward to implement this peace agreement in a good faith. That's very important, to implement the peace agreement in a very good faith. So having this peace agreement, I think this is a very good step forward, and it is on the right direction, although still you have other armed factions who haven't signed the peace agreement, whether Mr. Abdul Wahid or Mr. Al-Hulu, and that make it very bit
incomplete.
Yeah, incomplete. Yeah. But still, it is a good step, and we have to take the opportunity and the momentum to go towards peace and to depart from the culture of violence.
That is also just complete what you have started, I think. So let's go also jump that. Do you think after this signing the agreement, I've seen the political arena and we have seen the political field, which is still we're having some problems, and we have seen between the movements and between the FFC and whatever, that is part of maybe the same way if you go to the approaches and comparison between other countries like Ethiopia. Now the problem is still it starts from scratch now again. It started to the war. You know, the war is really since 2002. The conflict in Africa is being decreased. Now is completely now is about maybe here and there. It's not that big like before 1990s and whatever. The conflict and the war was too much in everywhere in Africa. Now it's been reduced a little bit. Now going to reduce more. The way it's been here in Ethiopia, and we are just neighbor. You know, this environment is similar to each other. Sudan, Ethiopia, they connected to each other. Do you think that the conjunction which is in political arena it can be finished now is and what is the mechanism of that?
This is actually bring about one central question: to what extent the countries can sustain peace You know, during the last few years, Ethiopia performed economic performance and realized remarkable development in different aspects of economic development, and also political and social stability in Ethiopia. Ethiopia provided example in Africa for economic development, for tourism, for peace, for different aspects of life. Ethiopia provided good
And the economic, by the way.
But yeah, in the economic also, the experience very fast and accelerated growth of the economic growth. But unfortunately, now Ethiopia goes back to the first block. This breaking through the Tigray rebels against the federal government in Ethiopia. I think this is one of the challenges that always encounter peace, how to sustain peace in country. If I were asked about how to address this problem, I would say that the Ethiopian government should keep more patient, no need to involve in war. And we know the damaging consequences of war. And the federal government of Ethiopia should wait for dialogue and for negotiation and give more time to the mediators in order to settle peaceful. No need to go into war directly. We know the results of war. We experienced war for centuries back. The result, you have to go back again to dialogue and to also discussions among these two conflicting parties in Ethiopia. Our advice is no need to go and to settle this issue through violence. Violence is harmful to the community, to the nation, to the prosperity of the nation.
To the economy, by the way.
To the economy of the nation, So the Ethiopian government are strongly encouraged to involve in peace negotiations in order to settle this issue peacefully.
Okay, that's also an important point, Dr. Samani. Let me also pass the same question, because as you, Mr. Dr. Zuhair, you are in a different part of the United Nations and work in different field in the conflict, and you are a specialist in that type of conflict. About the experience of the people, of the countries which is in Africa, and approaches and comparison between Sudan and the rest of Africa. Others, they try to solve the problem, like Kenya now. Kenya now is there is a stability, at least democracy and whatever. Now they have crossed that conflict, maybe up to now. We can say up to now. Maybe that is one of the examples in the area. And as the professor mentioned that. Ethiopia also is a part of us, because the conflict really is maybe transferred to the, even at least to the region, and we know that the African Horn is all connected to each other in a very sensitive area. About the experience of the experiment of the countries in Africa, do you think that there is an examples in Africa which is they have solved the problem the way they have after the conflict, after the war?
Thank you, Dr. Yasser. Generally speaking, there are two models to approach peace. There is the liberal model, and there is the power and wealth sharing model. In Africa, it looks like the African Union prefers the wealth and power sharing approach. The wealth and power sharing approach, it is good in a sense that it appeals to bring all stakeholders and to make them share the power and share the wealth, in a sense that the dividends of power and wealth is equally distributed, and then the decision making itself is equally, all people equally sharing it. But the problem with this approach is that when you give people power sharing according to their weight, how can you measure that weight? For example, this group have to be given this proportion of power. How can you weigh that? That's one problem. Yeah, the criteria.
In what basis that?
On what basis?
They going to
exactly
sharing. That
on
is
what basis? Do you share this power?
Share is true.
Sometimes it happens.
And even the same the wealth and
the same for the wealth. But let us just concentrate on power sharing. If you give one group power, say two ministerial jobs.
Yeah.
And for some time later on, this group discovered that, or the whole stakeholder, this group is much less in support than this way. So the group will insist not to give up. That is my share.
Yeah.
And then they will go back to consolidate their position by depending on their ethnicity, because they are coming from ethnicity. And the ethnicity will support them because they will tell them that this is your share and they are going to take it from you. That is the problem. If you look to Ethiopia, that is the case with the Tigray. The Tigray used to be the head of the state, was from the Tigray.
30 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then he died, I replaced by someone else, and later on replaced by someone from another ethnicity. For example, the
Oromo.
yeah, he's from Oromo. Mr. What is his name, please?
Ahmadi, Abiy Ahmadi.
Yeah,
Prime
Abiy Ahmadi. The prime minister is now from Oromo. Although Oromo is the
Very
biggest
large,
the
Yeah,
biggest
the majority,
ethnic group.
the majority.
It's considered to be 40% of the Ethiopian population.
Yeah, sometimes I
Much
think
bigger.
so this is the, they have said more than that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the problem now, the Tigrayan,
Yes.
see, it's like
It's 22.
they have been, yeah,
20%, 16%.
Yeah.
And the Amhara is 22. This is the 16 and the 22.
So I'm just
Yeah.
making an analysis. It looks like the Tigray are not satisfied with their share
Share
in
power,
power,
share.
and they see that the share power they have given is now getting
Less than their
less
weight.
and less and less than their weight. But in reality, that might not be the truth. But at the end, it leads to conflict and
Yeah.
take people back to square one.
War.
Yeah. So that is the risk of depending on the power sharing strategy, power sharing approach. The same, you have just mentioned Kenya.
Yeah.
Kenya depends on ethnicity power sharing. And I might not be surprised if I can see the same scenario of the Ethiopia repeat itself in Kenya. Because you do not know the storm road. It works in a very, very slow and in a very unseen way. And it suddenly come up. The people inside might see it or might see some signs of it, but actually it can surprise people, as it has surprised us here. The other model, just 1 minute, the other model is the what they call it, the liberal model, liberal peace model. The liberal peace model focus more on economics, and it puts economic as a vehicle for the rest of the factors. Yeah, so they invest heavily on the economics, on the sense that if the economic is good, the livelihood of the people change. Yeah, the economic situation change. Then people can forget about conflict and they focus more on economic development, on business, on this kind of things. But unfortunately, in Sudan, we don't have that strong economic, or we don't have that fund. And I doubt the international community can help us with a huge fund to go on that track. Yeah.
That is very important. I think so, Dr. Zahir. And he mentioned also, I'm going to pass the question to you, Mr. Professor Samani. I think so the example of Ethiopia depends also in base of tribalism.
Yeah.
And Kenya also the same.
Yeah.
Now, since the independent, maybe one of the tribe, Kuj tribe of Rukunyata, and it came Noi from Kalenjin, and it came back to now to Kikuyu.
Yeah.
That is the competition there. It is tribalism competition,
Tribalism,
and based on
yes.
tribe. In also the same way in Tigray.
Yeah.
Tigray is also
Tribe.
Tigray, and the other
City,
problem in Ethiopia also the same.
Yeah.
But in Sudan, it seems that problem is a political problems.
Yeah.
It's just no any reasons
Yes.
regarding maybe the conflict of interest
Yeah.
or something like that. Those all the parties, they just fighting on that side.
Yeah.
and living since the independence. In fact, they're living the community and the people and the culture and whatever that is side, and there's only the conflict also and the competition only on politics and the seats and the Do you think that I think so the base in Sudan is so it's not that difficult like the other countries, and still we are in problem. Why? Since the independence.
In Sudan, I think a little bit border than Ethiopia and Kenya, and instead of tribalism, we have ethnicity also play a role in Sudan. The West, the North, the South. These create also some conflicting groups for very long history. And when I mentioned that we go back to Mahdiya, that we want to examine the roots of the causes of the violence in Sudan for a very long time. So tribalism play a very important role in these countries, in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in other part of Africa, and also in Sudan. Tribalism play a very considerable role, but within the ethnicity of the people, the group of ethnic groups, they gather together also to protect their interests in power sharing, in the wealth distributions, and these are very evident in the compositions of government, in compositions of any national institution. So tribalism again represents practical challenge. Now, if let us just think about the role of native administration in the peace process, it is very evident that tribalism has a deep root and deep, profound impact on peace process. You can see in Darfur, in the East Sudan, in different parts of all the tribes contribute substantially to the peace in the different part of country. So studying the tribalism again is a very important for social peace in the country, and also to know the position of the tribe, whether to support the peace or to harm the peace. In most cases, you will find sometimes the tribe play very important negative role in the peace building process. Some people, they always try to get support from the members of the tribes and try also to bargain on power sharing, on wealth distribution, and they become part of the violence available in the country. So addressing tribalism and also the ethnic groups in Sudan with a social study is important for peace, to build sustainable peace in country. These dimensions has a very profound impact in the different institutions of the country. So we need also to address these problems and to talk about how it deals with the national institution like government, like the national institution in the armed forces, in different institution influence peace process in the country. So tribalism and ethnic groups in Sudan, conflicting groups, is a matter and a very important cause for the current positions in Sudan. So if you want to make total relax in the wars and the social congestions in the country, you need also to address these dimensions and these problems, and you have to also make recommendations about how to deal with them in the future, because these represent potential challenge facing the peace and stability, like what happens in Ethiopia. After a very long history of peace, they again go back to the first block. And in other country or part in Africa, also you will find that tribalism play a very important role in war and also in violating peace in the country. So we need to pay also attention to that dimension.
I think so. To Dr. Professor Samani, also we are going, when you speak about this type of problem of tribalism and after the peace, in fact, I feel just sometimes, I fear sometimes, when I feel that also what happened to Ethiopia and peace building process and sustainable peace. That is, in fact, that what type of ways it needs a lot of awareness, not only to the community, even to our politicians in Sudan. We have to impose that one in their mind. At least let us cross and jump that problems. And this conflict, in fact, by the way, not to come back and whatever. Regarding if we jump to that, want to go to the transitional justice and reconciliation, Dr. Zuhair, and you are a specialist in that reconciliation, and when you go to the tolerance and forgiveness and whatever, it is really a very important point how you cross that that problem. And transitional justice, it means that only the to the criminal prosecutions only, or maybe to build the stability for community, to build the stability for the economic and socially and whatever. And we need to just maybe from the notion and the connotation and the concept of that transitional justice. And that this question also, because it's remaining only for us 5 minutes,
Okay.
and question also will pass it to the Mr. Prof also.
Thank you very much. In fact, Dr. Yasir, the issue of ethnicity and tribalism was, and how it relates to power, it was in Sudan for a long time, but it has been very acute and very paramount during the last 30 years, during the Inqilab, because the government have invested heavily on tribes and tribalism by creating proximate militia, and this militia was part of the government apparatus and governing process and this and that. And now, after the peace agreement, now you can see how these tribes and ethnicities consolidated their positions and becoming forward to be part of the power. And according to this agreement, they need to go back a bit and to allow the political organizations and political parties, civil society organizations to replace their place and to play their role. That is the conducive situation for the peace process and for peace building. But the question is, do these ethnicities and tribes will voluntarily withdraw and give the chance for the political parties to build up and the civil societies to take this role? It's not an easy. There is no easy answer, especially if you see these people now become part of the government itself. Some militias are now part of the government. Some militias are now part of the state apparatus back in the at the state level.
Peace agreement.
Yeah, the peace agreement is talking about the disarmament. I'm talking about the reformation of all the armed forces and police and all this together. It's very good to talk about that, but in practice, that will be the very, very difficult job. And if it's not confirmed, if it is not confirmed perfectly, then we'll go back to square one, unfortunately. So the transitional justice in 1 minute is something related to the arrangements, a temporal arrangement for the period following a peace process. It is related to post-conflict situation, because the situation previous to conflict or during the conflict, the legal framework and all issues, all apparatus and institutions related to legal institutions related to justice, related to this, cannot handle the situation after the post-conflict. And also, we need to prepare the legal justice, the institutions, and we need to be creative so as to create a conducive situation for the peace and reconciliation. So you have three pillars: reconciliation, justice, and then you can achieve peace. How can you reconcile between these?
This is come to me reconciliation to and the three this is triangle. Can you just give us
definitely. Just let me to
program is already
now we are crashing. Wasn't the end of the
reconciliation and peace problem.
The transitional justice actually conceptually define it as a total arrangement, as mentioned by Dr. Zuhair, total arrangement of judicial and non-judicial that is relating to the human rights violations during the war. And especially there are some about 4 steps that to be carried by the government after reconciling the war and settle the war. Number 1, the criminal prosecutions, to be people, many criminals should be, and also the truth commissions or the truth-seeking commission, that is importantly from non-judicial bodies, and the reform, and before that you have the repatriation of the
Refugees.
and the refugees and the compensations of these groups, and finally the reform of the institution, which is the most important. The armed forces, the intelligence forces, the police forces, all the stakeholders contributed by way or another to the human rights violation. That institution, and especially native administration, as I mentioned several times, native administration should be revised again, because part of this conflict and sometimes part of the human rights violations. So I think in order to make sustainable peace and to build a bright futures for new generation, we need to deal with these facts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prof. Samani Hunua. And thank you very much, Dr. Zuhair Bashar. We have been, thank you very much, dear viewers. We have been in 1 hour in open dialogue. We didn't finish, in fact, by the way, the episode, in fact, is been, and the issue is too big and it's not that small. We're expecting that maybe another episode near the future. And thank you very much and goodbye.